Thank you for joining me in learning about my action research project. My name is Kristina Petrovic, and I'll be taking you through my research proposal. What I was looking into when I started this project was how to encourage students to take more academic risks. When I look at this problem, I see that it greatly impacts my students because I know that if they're not taking risks, they definitely are not confident enough with their own learning to share their ideas or thoughts. I have been doing a lot of reading before starting this project, and I came across one article by the Washington Post, which mentioned that the problem of students not taking risks is mostly prominent in mathematics, language, and science. But as we know, it's also prevalent in any school setting. Teachers are also greatly impacted by this issue because not only do they have to teach their students, but if students aren't participating, they can't prepare their students for the real world, where it's really important for people to know how to take risks. The problem actually mostly relies on their fear of failure. And as I was going through my research and reading many articles and blogs, I realized that the reason why students don't take risks is because they're afraid of what others will say when they don't know the answer. What I want to know is how I can improve and encourage my students to take these academic risks and what I can do as a teacher to make them become more successful 21st century learners. I want to then, in my research statement, I want to be able to find out the best techniques such as creating a positive classroom culture and encouraging intrinsic motivation, also rewarding the process of failure in order to nurture this quality in my students. I want to be able to know how I can be proactive in getting my students comfortable with making mistakes and encouraging them to be 21st century learners. Taking risks can be a very difficult concept for students. Students often focus on how they look like, their perceptions from their peers. Therefore, students participate less because they believe that if they give an incorrect answer, that everybody will know that they're wrong. For teachers, it's also tough to get students to participate. Sometimes it's really up to the teacher to create that environment. And if the environment isn't set up for student success, then students can't get to where we want them to be. Many articles and many researchers suggest that mistakes are essential for learning. There is a great article called Creating Space for Risk by Edutopia, which highlights the fact that mistakes are absolutely important for learning. And my interest is knowing in how I can nurture a class environment which encourages students to take risks and to feel confident in making a mistake. This actually creates authentic learning experiences. Based on all this research and the blogs and articles that I read, I realized that I'm mostly interested in how I can encourage my students to become more willing to take academic risks in the classroom. And when I say the classroom, I would actually love to focus on a French immersion classroom. There's many thoughts that in French immersion, students are more willing to learn and they're ready because their brains are actually different than students who are in an Anglophone school. But because I will be a French teacher and I'm hoping to work in the French immersion environment, I'm really curious to know how I can get students in French immersion to participate more. And when I say classroom, I specifically mean a regular classroom, grade 8, filled with approximately 30 students in an elementary school. The sub-questions that I'm looking to investigate is how can I create an environment where students feel safe to make mistakes by applying the right classroom management strategies? How can I teach my students to learn from their mistakes to show them that mistakes are an essential part of learning through my lessons? As I go through my research project, I realize that there's some very important terms that need to be defined before any kind of research or analysis can begin. The first term to look through is academic risk-taking. What is it? When looking at definitions online, I realized that academic risk-taking means the action of taking a risk in an academic setting where to students the outcome of participating is unknown. So some examples of this could include answering questions out loud, sharing opinions or ideas, or participating in class. But quite honestly, academic risk-taking is just participation in class. When a teacher asks a question or asks students to dive in without knowing the exact answer and students going for it, that is academic risk-taking. With academic risk-taking, there is participation involved, and participation would be defined as actively and willingly sharing thoughts, ideas, answers with initiative and interest. When talking about these two terms, we must also consider what is a safe space. Based on the information that I presented previously, I talked about a positive classroom culture or a safe environment. Well, within those terms, the major term is safe space, and that is an environment where students feel inclined to participate and feel like there is no judgment to do so. Finally, one of the other central terms is authentic learning. I mentioned that in order to take academic risks, we are teaching students how to be great 21st century learners, and also we're teaching them how to engage in authentic learning. And here, authentic learning is defined as acquiring knowledge from true learning experiences based on the context of real life. When I began my research process, I concentrated on 3 sources. And while I was doing my research, I realized that there's actually not a lot of research out there pertaining to academic risk-taking. This was actually very shocking to me because when I spent all of my time volunteering in classrooms, especially grade 8 French immersion classrooms, I realized that students just don't want to participate. And this was a question that was always lingering in my mind. Why are they not participating? What can I do to make them participate more? So I decided to concentrate on 3 different resources, and they're different for particular reasons. The first source is by Pearson Inc., and this article just focuses on bringing light to the meaning of intellectual or academic risk-taking. This article talks about how risk-taking involves adaptive learning behavior. This means that the learner must adapt to situations where he or she is at risk of appearing less competent than others. This article aims to define the central terms, and I actually use this source to help inquire on which central terms I should use. The next source focuses on academic risk-taking in higher education. Now, this source pertains to adults and adult learning. However, adults are the product of how they were as a child. And I believe that looking at how adults perceive risk-taking will definitely help me understand how students in grade 8 would take risks. So this article talks about, it gives actually different perspectives on the scope of academic risk-taking, and it sheds lights on how adults perceive risk-taking. Now, risk-taking, according to this article, is very important because it teaches us how to become a lifelong learner, especially as an adult. And this can easily apply to the situation of children. The article sheds light on different types of risk, which will be explained further in the summary of research. And it also gives reasons for why people choose to take risks, which can be related to the 3 suggested rules of risk-taking. This article also addresses the motivations behind the participants' decisions to take risks. Also, it talks about the psychology behind the behavior of risk-taking, which can honestly apply to any age. My third source, Promoting Risk-Taking in Mathematics Classrooms, the Importance of Creating a Safe Learning Environment, specifically focuses on risk-taking in one subject area. It looks through the lens of mathematics classrooms to shed light on why fostering a safe environment is essential for academic risk-taking. Now, I mentioned previously that in the Washington Post article that in the mathematics classroom is the main subject area where students just do not take risks. Now, this article talks about why, and the main reason is fear. And students are just not able to build enough resiliency to criticism when they get the answer wrong, and therefore they're afraid of being correct. so students just don't take those academic risks. This article highlights and actually gives specific analysis of the study to demonstrate that the teacher's dedication to creating a positive classroom culture is key to student success. In this article, the study is conducted with a group of secondary students, and students are tasked to take risks based on the teacher's classroom setup. The student and the teachers have regular interviews, and students take questionnaires in order to demonstrate whether or not they're taking risks and how they're doing so. The information found in this study demonstrates that the better the classroom culture, the higher the academic risk-taking, and this actually applies virtually across all subjects. In my literature summary, I aim to explain in detail what these articles suggested. Now I'll just explain briefly, and you can have your chance to read over the details, but the main idea is that academic risk-taking is rarely addressed in education, and as I was going through my research, I really found this to be true. Though there's much talk about promoting students' engagement in classroom, there isn't really much attention to engaging students in academic risk-taking. Making mistakes is actually very important because students get to learn how to appear not like they're less competent than others, and how to build that resiliency. Articles that I read highlight the importance of showing that making mistakes is actually a desirable trait. This is because as we learn how to make mistakes, we improve our motivation, self-efficacy, confidence, and interest. It also makes it possible to become 21st century learners. Many of these articles suggest that teachers need to make students view failure as an opportunity to learn and to grow. And without this, they can't be creative or innovative, and you won't have competence for metacognition. In Pearson's article, we're talking about encouraging intrinsic motivation. And this is the main type of motivation needed to do anything, especially taking risks. And risk-taking is a painful activity for many students. So having that intrinsic motivation to do better for themselves will improve their risk-taking abilities. Teachers need to be able to adopt a positive philosophy towards errors and making mistakes in order to make students to feel at ease should errors occur. Therefore, teachers need to advocate the importance of offering multiple perspectives. In the article pertaining to risk-taking in higher education, it is cited that learners can be goal-oriented, activity-oriented, and learning-oriented. Now, depending on what orientation the students have, this actually affects how willing they are to take academic risks. Students who are goal-oriented care about the outcomes of their learning. This actually means that they're concerned about what they get from knowing what they know. Activity-oriented learners engage for the sake of engaging in an activity, but do not really care about what they're learning. Finally, learning-oriented students genuinely like to learn, and thus engage in behaviors that allow them to become lifelong learners. And in order to encourage students to adopt academic risk-taking behaviors, teachers actually need to promote the benefits of being learning-oriented students. This article talks about the fears, one of the main reasons why students don't take academic risks. They're afraid of failure, and they're worried about what people will think if they get the answer wrong. And in order to associate risk with positive emotions rather than negative ones, the author suggests for teachers to create more experiential learning opportunities where students learn by doing and where mistakes are welcome and often required for advances in learning. This article suggests using a constructivist learning theory, which basically means collaborating with others and having student-centered learning experiences in order to improve the risk-taking abilities. In the article pertaining to risk-taking in the mathematics classroom, risk-taking is defined in the mathematical setting. This article talks about how risk-taking leads to learning about how to ask critical questions and how to construct arguments, especially how to respond to others' arguments in the face of criticism. The researcher mentions that teachers need to promote academic risk-taking in order to teach students how to reach a consensus with others, as well as how to make informed decisions. This article also talks about the importance of creating a positive learning environment. It also states that as students get older, they are less likely to take academic risks. And this is also because they're worried about preserving their identity. Therefore, the article mentions that student-centered learning environments are the best for students in order to improve their academic risk-taking and to show students that there are multiple entry points and multiple points of view. This summary of research informs my action research topic by providing valuable background information on academic risk-taking in the classroom context. Though not much information exists, I can use this research to figure out how I can conduct my own data collection and what to focus on. The Literature Explorer names the learning environment and collaboration as two important factors, and I will be focusing on these two factors in my study. When I think about the study, I realize the significance my action research project will have in the education community, because many of the benefits are associated with promoting academic risk-taking in the classroom. We all know that risk is a major part of life, and teachers need to be able to teach their students how to take calculated academic risks. And when I talk about calculated, I mean risks that have been thought through before they happen. So teaching students how to think about how to make that risk is the best lifelong learning skill. Now I'd like to move on to talk about my research action plan. I will be using 3 data sources. The first one will be student questionnaires, the next one will be interviews, and the third one will be teacher logs or a journal. Now the student questionnaires, there will be an initial one going into the research plan, and there will be a final one at the end. Interviews will be conducted throughout the research process in order to check in with students and to get firsthand quotes and experiences from the student. And the teacher logs and journal will be created from the teacher's point of view, and they will be filled in as soon as they observe the target behavior. And when I mention the target behavior, I am talking about the academic risk-taking behavior. In order to ensure that my research connects, that it's valuable, and that it's reliable, I have created this table to test its validity. I will be able to know that students are demonstrating academic risk-taking behaviors by comparing the student questionnaires to the teacher log. If students initially mention that they are not comfortable with taking risks and I don't observe risk-taking behaviors in my log, I will know that this phenomenon is true based on my data. I can tell that students learning from the action of making mistakes is happening by looking at my teacher log and student interviews. Therefore, by interviewing students and getting firsthand information on whether or not they're making mistakes and if they're learning from them, they will be able to tell me, and I can compare to my notes and what I observed. Finally, I can test whether the teacher created a conducive environment for academic risk-taking by comparing all 3 data sources. I can look at my initial and final student questionnaires, I can look at my teacher logs, and I can compare with my student interviews, which happen all throughout the process. Student questionnaires or surveys. As I mentioned, the survey will be done initially right at the beginning of the process and at the end. It will be made up of approximately 10 questions, 8 multiple choice, and 2 open-ended questions. And for the first test, the objective would be to get diagnostic information about how students feel towards academic risk-taking and why. It will be based on classroom observations and scholarly articles to determine the types of questions to be asked, and students will be able to choose the right answer that suits them. It is a really reliable way to gather initial data on student perceptions because it is anonymous and students will be able to be honest with their answers. The data is quantitative because a statistical analysis can be done to determine the percentage of students that answered a question a particular way, which demonstrates the amount of students that agree on an answer. So I can see how many students are leaning towards being comfortable with academic risk-taking and how many are not. And I can use this exact same format at the very end of my research project to figure out what has changed. When looking at student-teacher interviews, I can explain that interviews will be conducted bi-weekly or at the end of each month to check in with the students and to collect data on the progress of the action research project. So students can actually come up in pairs, or I can do students individually, and I can ask students questions based on how they feel about the academic risk-taking process. Questions may be kept throughout. Could be describe a moment where you took an academic risk recently or when you chose not to take one, and how did it make you feel? So this kind of question can be used throughout because the answer to this question might change throughout the process. However, at each interview, there might be different questions based on what kind of data I'm focusing on that week. This data collection is reliable if the pairs are kept the same throughout because students may feel inclined to change their answers if their partners changed. These interviews will provide first-hand accounts of progress of the action research project, and I can actually use student quotes to inform my data. This is also a mix between qualitative and quantitative data, and mixing up these kinds of data is key to ensure reliable collection of data. Finally, my teacher log or journal will be a type of table. So it will be a log with a space to write anecdotal notes or journal entries in order to track the risk-taking behavior. So I will actually create a table where there will be the name of the activity that we're doing, whether or not students demonstrated academic risk-taking or to which degree. And in that case, I can actually use a point system where 5 points would be to a high degree they demonstrated academic risk-taking behaviors, and 1 would demonstrate a very low degree, almost non-existent amount of academic risk-taking. So for each type of activity that we do, I can either check off that there is risk-taking, or I can evaluate the degree of risk-taking behavior, and then right beside it I can make a note in my teacher log. I can note who might be doing it and why and what happened. And this is actually both quantitative and qualitative data, and I can have a standardized list of teacher journal prompts in order to help me fill in the anecdotal log. So at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that I would be focusing on grade 8 students in the French immersion stream in a regular classroom of around 30 students in an elementary school. And what I would actually like to do is include all grade 8 students in that same school to make the scope much larger. I will also include other grade 8 teachers to make a larger pool, as I mentioned, and other colleagues will serve as collaborators to inform this action research project and to ensure that I am on the right track. They will offer feedback and support throughout this process, and of course, I will be taking out any identifiable information from my students to ensure their safety when I'm sharing information with other colleagues or teachers. So the setting is the classroom learning environment. Anytime I'm teaching the lesson and anytime the students are engaged in a learning activity. Data collection will happen in the classroom, and again, this will be a grade 8 French immersion classroom in an elementary setting in St. Catharines. The data will be collected mostly online and on the iPad using pre-made charts. The data collection will occur at the time the target behavior, which is academic risk-taking, is observed, or after class. And some data collection will occur during class with student-teacher interviews while an online survey. And also data collection is ongoing. Now, because we are mentioning involving other classrooms and other teachers, the main thing that's really important is keeping identifying information confidential. According to Regulation 437/97, professional misconduct, teachers can be tried for professional misconduct if they do not respect the confidentiality of their students. Therefore, this action research project will ensure that students are kept safe and that their dignity is of utmost importance by maintaining confidentiality at all times. That being said, the very first thing that I will do before I conduct this research project is getting consent. It will be getting consent from parents, the district school board, the principal, ensuring that all the paperwork is made in order to protect the students' identities. All of the data will be kept under lock and key, and any kind of data on the computer will be kept under an encrypted folder that nobody can access. So I will ensure that all of the information is kept safe and my students' identifying information are kept confidential. When looking at the timeline, it very much depends on the type of data. As I mentioned, the student questionnaires, there will be 2 done, one at the start of the investigation near the end of September, once the teacher and students get to know each other, and then once at the end of the investigation in June in order to see how far the students have come. There will also be a teacher log or journal entry, and this will be done every day or weekly, depending on the activities and initiatives to encourage academic risk-taking. So this will happen from October to June. Then we have the student-teacher interviews. This will be happening once a month at the end of the month, October to June, and sometimes bi-weekly, depending on the progress which is being made, or possibly even the regress. Now, in order to analyze the data, I will be talking about how I can analyze each data source separately. For the student initial and final questionnaires, I can analyze them in both quantitatively and qualitatively. For quantitative, I'll be looking for trends in the students' answers to determine the consensus among the students. This is how I will be analyzing what I see in terms of how students feel about taking academic risks and why they feel this way. I can also use an SPSS for quantitative data. This is a software that I can use to help me analyze my statistical sources. I can also use a t-test for this. In terms of qualitative data, I will look at the 2 open-ended questions and I will read them to see what their perceptions are. I can maybe also create a word cloud online to demonstrate generally what students are feeling to show the big picture before investigation begins. All of this will help me analyze this data source. For the next data source, which would be the teacher log and journal entries, again I have both types of data. For quantitative, I will be counting how many times students demonstrated the targeted behavior, which is academic risk-taking, under each type of prompt or activity. So as I mentioned before, after each time they're doing an activity and I count up all the check marks, I can see for which activity they demonstrated the most academic risk-taking. I can analyze this data by showing the frequency of behaviors in a bar graph to see which activity yields the most academic risk-taking behavior. For qualitative, my journal entries will actually add to the observations to supplement the quantitative data. So what I can do is I can organize by themes or categories what the students have said or the kind of behavior that I observed in that kind of table in order to analyze this data. For teacher interviews, this is strictly qualitative data. Students' answers to interview questions will provide me with additional observations and will allow me to quote students when analyzing my quantitative data. This will help with my triangulation in order to see where is another place that I saw evidence of this behavior happening or not happening. So I can also create another table to analyze, and I can analyze by concepts or similar answers. The table can help me determine the general experience students are having with my investigation and will inform my practice greatly. In order to conclude, I have to say that I am extremely interested in the outcome of this research project. I actually hope that one day in my teaching career I can actually go ahead and investigate this, because I would love to know what I can do as a teacher to improve my students' willingness to take academic risks. My journey in creating this action research project has really shown me that there are so many ways to inform one teaching's practice. I can have any question in the world and I can set it up just like this in order to find the answers. And though questions may not always lead to answers, they will certainly most likely lead to self-reflection. And this is key to becoming a lifelong learner and a reflective teacher. I know that this investigation will help any beginning teacher or teachers well in their career because they will know how to become better educators. I mentioned that teaching students how to become 21st century learners by teaching them how to take academic risks is a life skill because it leads to authentic learning situations. And when I talk about calculated risks, I talk about teaching students how to think about how to make that risk and why it's very important. It will impact students to have a thirst for knowledge and for innovation. And I believe that this research question will greatly impact the learning community by helping students build their inner confidence while learning how to be compassionate and supporting towards their peers. When students learn to accept making mistakes, they will accept others, and that leads to kindness and learning. This action research project greatly influences my own teaching practice by showing me the importance of ongoing learning and constant versatility to fit the ever-changing students that will be coming through my classroom doors. Thank you so much for listening.